snap. The kick is in the air, and the kick this time is no, sir-ree. No, sir-ree. Final score, Tennessee 20, Florida 17. Pandemonium reigns.
You're listening to the RTI Podcast, powered by WashingtonInsider.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome in to another episode of the RTI Podcast. I'm Nathaniel Rutherford, managing editor of WashingtonInsider.com, joined by Ben McKee, our staff writer here at RTI, and he's also the producer and co-host of the Swain Event morning radio show. You can listen to that 7 to 10 a.m. every morning on Swain's app, the Swain Event. You can also find it on Periscope, Facebook Live, and YouTube. We appreciate you all tuning in to another episode here of the RTI Podcast. Last time you heard us, it was our first post-game reaction show of the year on late Saturday night, and Ben, we've had a lot of time to process things, a lot of time to talk about things. You and I have, obviously not on a podcast, but off the record, you have definitely on Swain's show. I feel like even 3 days actually, as we're recording this on Tuesday afternoon, 3 days out from what happened on Saturday, it's still, to me, really weird and hard to digest what all went on. I mean, and you've watched, come back and rewatch things. You're gonna have a piece out sometime after this podcast comes out, where your kind of final thoughts from the game, and you've gone back and looked at a lot of the film from it. I've gone back and watched some highlights and film and stuff from it, and it's, to me, just still baffling at some of the stuff that happened. And I don't want to sit here and just rehash the game over and over again, because no one's going to like that. Not us, not the listeners. No one listening or no one partaking in this in any way is going to like just sitting here and rehashing what happened on Saturday. But I got to thinking, and just hearing reaction and seeing reaction that day online from fans. We talked about that a little bit in the post-game reaction show. You guys, on the Swain Event have talked about it a little bit too, but I wanted to kind of go a little more in depth with it here. Seeing reaction from fans, hearing thoughts from other media members, from my own thoughts. I know, Ben, you and I don't think really sat down and talked about it, but I want to do it here for, with us and for our listeners listening here, and if you're listening, feel free to chime in on Twitter or anything like that to let us know your thoughts on this. If you're listening to it via the YouTube channel, leave a comment on the video and let us know. But I'm curious, this is Jeremy Pruitt's 13th game coaching at Tennessee. It's the first game of his second year at Tennessee. We all knew that this was a big rebuild he had ahead of him. Ben, you've said multiple times you think this is a 4 or 5 year type rebuild, where it's not going to be year 3 is going to be a year where he has kind of a breakout year. You think it's not going to be until year 4 or 5, and I've been right there with you. I think this is a pretty big rebuild that he has ahead of him. But even still, with that in mind, that what happened Saturday should not have happened. You shouldn't have had this historically bad loss to Georgia State happen. But I'm curious on your thoughts, and I'm curious, you all have talked with a lot of people calling in on Swain's show, on the text box, on Periscope, on Facebook. You've talked to and interacted with a lot more people than I have, because I actually kind of took a little bit of a sabbatical from Twitter on Sunday. I wasn't as active on it on Monday because it was a holiday, and I was on mostly just to post articles and stuff. But I've seen enough to know public opinion of Pruitt. It hasn't been lower. It's obviously even lower than it was after the Missouri and Vanderbilt games last year. It's lower than what it was after that, and then when he made comments about wanting fans to come out and be at the orange and white game or whatever he said. I don't remember that, and that didn't bother me a whole lot, but it did bother some people. Ben, maybe not even you, but where do you think, you can give me your opinion too if you want to, where you are on Jeremy Pruitt, but where do you think this fan base is on Jeremy Pruitt? Is this first game of his second season, is the honeymoon period already over? Did this disastrous loss, did it just make even the people who are most staunchly on Jeremy Pruitt's side? I think of Andy, who calls into your all show every single day, it feels like, but he's sometimes on hold at 6:50 in the morning before we all start at 7. Did this loss even shake the confidence and the faith of the Andys out there, of these fans who are super fans who are going to be bleeding orange till they die? It does. How much did this really affect the fan confidence and the fan faith in what Jeremy Pruitt can accomplish as a head coach? Because I think it's fairly significant. I've seen people who are kind of staunch, have been staunchly in his corner, not back out completely, but say, man, maybe, I don't know, it put a lot of doubt into their faith. And I'm curious kind of your feel on that, because like I said, I know you've talked to, quite a few more fans than I have.
Of the Andys of the world, nothing is going to change their opinion. They are the diehards of the diehards. They are the ultimate optimists. But we had somebody call in today and put it perfectly. Tennessee is in a good situation with let me restart. Tennessee has lost the average Tennessee fan quite some time ago. I would say probably after the 2016 season debacle when Jalen Hurd quit the team in the middle of the South Carolina game, and then everything went downhill from there. You lose to Vanderbilt, can't make the Sugar Bowl. Since then, I think the average fan kind of gave up at that point. If not then definitely the 2017 debacle, and the Florida game, and then you lose to Georgia 41-0, and it's just so on and so forth. So I think your average fan was kind of out then. But now the caller this morning on the Swain event put it perfectly that while those average fans have been checked out for a while now, Tennessee's they're in danger of losing the diehard fans, because the diehard fans are starting to give up on the program, and that's when you reach dangerous territory as a football program. You never want to have that happen. When the diehards start giving up, you're battling some issues. There are things wrong when the diehards are giving up. So the Andys of the world, we need to create his own term for him, because he's beyond a diehard. As I said, he is the ultimate optimist. He's not going to ever kind of waver in his faith for Pruitt or the players or really anybody. So for somebody like Andy, no, they are not wavering. But I don't know how you can watch the Georgia State game on Saturday after the previous two outings dating back to last year when Tennessee was embarrassed by Missouri, embarrassed by Vanderbilt, and not be worried about Pruitt and the long-term ability to be successful at Tennessee. I don't know how you can. So I think Saturday was definitely a wake-up call and definitely inserted some doubt into the diehard fans as well.
Yeah, I think that I don't think it's a mass exodus of fans. I don't think you have a bunch of people saying no they're sold off of Pruitt or anything like that. I don't think that you have a massive amount of people floating away from Pruitt or saying they're not sold on him. I think, though, I know myself personally, after watching the game, like I said, go back and kind of watching highlights and stuff of it again, and hearing you and Swain break things down here are other people I know who know football and stuff breaking things down. I will say this: it's put a lot of doubt in my mind, not in Pruitt's ability to be a coach. I think he's an excellent coach. Definitely a very good defensive mind. But it was one of your callers on the Swain event, Ben. I'm struggling to remember who it was. Like, y'all had so many callers on both Monday and Tuesday, but it was definitely it was on Tuesday's show that talked about for Pruitt to be this defensive mastermind, and if him bringing in Derrick Ansley, who's supposed to be a really good defensive mind, and just the staff in general that they have on the defense. How do you let up 38 points to Georgia State? And then I get it, a couple of those were because they got short fields because of turnovers, and it's hard to when you fumble the ball and give a team the ball at the 23-yard line, it's pretty hard to stop them from scoring. Even if it's if you hold them to a field goal, that's kind of a victory there, but it's still 3 points that your offense gave away to the other team. But that doesn't explain every score in the game. That explains maybe two of the scores in the game that happened where Tennessee gave them a short field, where you had the interception from Garantano, that fumble, and I think the other fumble, I don't remember. I don't think it gave them super great field position, but it still gave them a shorter field than what it would have been punting or something like that. But still, it did shake my confidence in his ability as a head coach. I'll just put it at that. Like I said, it didn't make me feel like he's a bad coach overall, because I do think he's a good coach. He wouldn't have been able to get to this point. He wouldn't have been able to have the success he had at the Florida States and the Georgias and the Alabamas. I think he's still a good coach. It makes me wonder personally, is he, I also have to, acknowledge this is his second year as a head coach ever. He's learning on the job. and he's learning on the job in arguably the toughest situation in college football that he could have walked into. I mean, you could say maybe a team that's been on probation, or maybe what's been going on at Florida State. They're an absolute mess right now. That you could throw in Baylor if he'd taken the job there last year or 2 years ago, or whatever. I mean, there are other ones you could maybe compare to, but with the kind of just absolutely toxic culture, we're going to get to that in a second, talking about Tennessee's culture and just stuff that's happened after the loss. But inheriting really just everything he inherited with the culture and with the absolute program of losing that's been and instilled in Tennessee's mindset over the last decade, and just everything he had with the way the roster was, the shape that it's in, literally the shape that they were in, and also with the shape the talent was in. I understand, and I've been, I think Ben, you and I both have been, fairly lenient on Pruitt because, like I said, he's a first-time head coach. He inherited an absolute mess of a program. That's why I'm not saying I'm sold out on him entirely, because I acknowledge that there's still a lot of factors working against him and his staff, and the guys who are trying on this team. There's factors working against them too. But man, I'm not gonna lie, and I'm not gonna sugarcoat anything here. What I saw Saturday, and from what I've heard and everything since then, from the way things have broken down about assignments, alignments, and things that have been done and said about from players and all this different stuff, it's making me wonder, can he be a head coach? And it's not fair to him. He's a second-year head coach, period, but he is making over $3 million, so he knows what that entitles him to as far as criticism goes. So, Ben, to me, it definitely did shake my confidence in him as a head coach, whether that's fair or not. But I do now have a lot more skepticism of him as a head coach, and I'm open to having my mind changed. If they go out and throttle BYU and they come out and still salvage the season and go 6-6 or somehow 7-5 and make it to a bowl game this year, I will still have doubts, but they'll be alleviated somewhat. But I'm being honest, that game absolutely shook my confidence in what Pruitt can be as a head coach, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, there's no debating. He's a great defensive mind. I mean, his resume just speaks to that. You go all the way back to Hoover High School when he was a high school head coach. Then you look at his time at Florida State, at Georgia, at Alabama. There's no doubting that Jeremy Pruitt knows his X's and O's, and Saturday's game against Georgia State was not a great representation of that. But I have the same questions that you have, and a lot of people have, is can he manage an entire organization and entire program? That is to be seen. So far, it doesn't appear that he is all that great at doing so. I mean, he had the dysfunction last year with Tyson Helton, that offensive coordinator. Him and Terry Fair, a former Vol, who was working with the secondary last year, they didn't necessarily get along. There was some dysfunction there, and then you already look at the dysfunction that has taken place this year in the first game of the season against a Sun Belt team that had never beaten a Power 5 team and won 2 games last year. And the team isn't playing with effort for a third straight game. I think because of that, I think there's a lot of reasons to doubt whether or not he can manage an entire staff of grown men. Can he check his ego at the door and allow those coaches to do their job? It just seems like at times he is in over his head. When he's not recruiting, it seems like he's in over his head to me. When it comes down to just simply coaching, and he's not worried about all the extra stuff that he has to worry about as a head coach, I mean, he's done well. He did that in the Auburn game last year. He did that in the Kentucky game last year. But in all the other games, when he's concerned himself with everything that's going on, and yes, that is his job as a head coach, but it is also his responsibility to allow Tyson Helton to do his job. Tyson Helton wasn't good, but Pruitt did not allow him to do his job. And then I don't know the dynamic between whether he's letting Chaney do his job. I imagine that he is. But he has to let those guys coach the offense and him worry about the defense. Ansley is calling plays. Let Ansley call plays until he proves that he's not capable of doing so. So I think that's my biggest critique of Pruitt to this point, is that he just isn't willing to just let go and let everybody fulfill their responsibilities and do their job. He thinks that he has to have his blueprint on every single part of the program. You look at the best coaches across the country. Dabo Swinney, Nick Saban, Chris Peterson, even Mike Leach. I mean, guys like that, Gary Patterson, and we can even throw in Bob Stoops in there. I know he's retired, but Bob Stoops, they let their coaches coach. They let their support staff do support staff stuff. They let the recruiting coordinator be the recruiting coordinator, and that's what Jeremy Pruitt has to learn as a head coach, is to let everybody do their job, and I think everything would take care of itself. And as you mentioned, it's just his second year as a head coach, and that's the problem when you hire somebody who's never been a head coach before. There's going to be growing pains, and I think Jeremy Pruitt is going through those growing pains right now.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the stuff about him being more hands-off or less hands-off, or what just his ability that way, because I was going to bring that up and ask you about that, but you already addressed it. That was a big talking point all off-season is he going to allow his coaches to coach more and be more hands-off? And I agree with that. It looked to me, like he was with Jim Chaney, like he was trusting Jim Chaney with the offense. I didn't see a lot of visible frustration from Pruitt there. There were no comments after the game about anything being frustrated with the offense. I can't remember what game it was last year, but I remember the game where Jordan Murphy ripped off that 55-yard touchdown, or the 55-yard run, or 45-yard run, whatever it was, the big run he had on the reverse. And Pruitt said after the game that he didn't like that call, but then it obviously him working out and made him look dumb. You haven't heard. I mean, this has been one game, but you haven't heard that yet from Pruitt about Chaney. But I'm very curious about the defense with Ansley being the guy who's supposed to be calling plays. Pruitt made comments before the season started that made me wonder, how is he really still going to be involved? How heavily involved is he still going to be with the defensive play calling? And Ben, maybe I'm just looking too much into stuff. I don't know how much you can look too much into what happened on Saturday. Everyone should be on red alert and on a wake-up call, as the players said. And anyway, that's a different discussion to have. But everyone should be on red alert and wondering what the hell happened in that game. It almost looked to me like, what we saw how discombobulated Tennessee's offense was at times last year. To me, that's kind of what the defense looked like, and it made me wonder if Ansley and Pruitt, if you had two different ideas and philosophies on play calling. You wouldn't think so, because Pruitt has said multiple times about Ansley. I mean, he said this, upwards of a dozen times at this point. It feels like that Ansley can finish Pruitt's sentences. That they have a very similar philosophy. Essentially almost exactly the same philosophy on defense. And Pruitt has also mentioned before how difficult it is for his defense to be learned. It's not a super easy defense. It doesn't seem like, and it's more complex. It concerns me, I think, more than anything, more than what we saw from the offensive line. At least from there, you more or less expected that. You hope the offensive line is going to be better than what it was last year, but that at least you were used to seeing last year. You weren't used to seeing what happened on defense last year. From breakdowns and guys just not being good enough, yes. But from a schematic standpoint, that was probably the worst I've seen Tennessee's defense look under Pruitt. And I think you'd have to go back to, obviously probably under, I guess, South Sun Sari in 2012, or maybe even some of the later Bush years, just to see defenses that are comparable in terms of just not being able to line up. You had the joke from one of your callers, but it was accurate. I think Tennessee employed the very first ever 1-3-7 defensive scheme out there. You had one down lineman, 3 linebackers, and then 7 guys just kind of in the secondary, but they were just kind of roaming around. You had multiple times where guys were getting or at least one time where the guy was getting on the field late. You did have multiple times for sure where alignment was a major issue in the game. I don't know. I had a point when I made this, but now it feels like I'm just rambling. But that part concerns me. I do wonder what this defensive chemistry is like. And Pruitt said in his post-game press conference or Monday, whatever what it was. I know, Ben, you weren't a huge fan of his Monday press conference, but he said it in whatever one that he said, I thought we made good in-game adjustments. I have confidence in our coaching staff, and that I felt comfortable with them, and I feel like they all felt comfortable with each other. I don't know. The results on the field didn't look like that to me. And I'm not going to try to sit here and just bash Jeremy Pruitt or accuse him of lying to our faces or anything like that. He hasn't done anything like that enough, like Butch Jones did, to where I feel like it's warranted to sit here and just attack him. But from what I saw on Saturday, it didn't look to me like a team that was comfortable. The coaches were comfortable with each other, and it didn't look to me like there was one true direct path. It looked to me like there were a couple or 3 cooks in that kitchen, and that might have been too much. And maybe, like I said, maybe I'm reading too much into it. I don't know. But that defense really had me concerned on Saturday.
Yeah, and you should be concerned. Jeremy Pruitt is a defensive guy. They bring in Derrick Ansley, who is the highest paid defensive backs coach in the NFL last year with the Raiders. He could be on any staff in America this year in college football.
Yep.
He could probably be on any snap at the NFL level as well. But Tennessee was able to bring him in, pay him a lot of money, and he is very intelligent. He is one of the bright up-and-coming coaches across America right now at any school, and you pair him with Pruitt, and you expect a very good defensive product, especially against Georgia State. That's the problem. It's not like Tennessee lost the way they did to Alabama or Florida or Georgia. It was against a 2-10 Sun Belt team that had never beaten a Power 5 team in its program's history. That is the problem. So there should be concern when the linebackers are lining up on one hash and the defensive linemen are lining up on the other hash, when one safety's guessing that the running back's going to run through one gap and he commits to that gap, and the running back just goes the complete opposite way and he's completely burned, when defensive backs are just missing tackles, blowing assignments, and being beat by Georgia State receivers. It is concerning. I think part of it is that Tennessee lacks a lot of talent, but the number one issue is the effort. You don't have to coach effort. That is the one thing that, you didn't see that with Butch Jones' terrible teams his first 2 years. They played with effort. It wasn't until really the game that stands out to me in which effort was a problem for Butch Jones' teams was in 2016 probably. The Florida game or Georgia game, or like in the beginning. I know Tennessee won both of those games, but the first half of those games, both of them were terrible. That was really the first time we saw an effort issue with Butch Jones. So 3 years into Butch Jones, and we're only 13 games into Jeremy Pruitt, and 3 of his games have been there's been a lot of questionable effort. And really, you could point out the Florida game last year. You get blown out by that Florida team. I know they won 10 games, but if you go back and look at their schedule, there's a lot of luck involved in that, beating up on really bad teams and losing to the really good teams. And I know they beat Michigan in the bowl game, but that Michigan team was missing a lot off of its defense. So there's a lot of reasons to be concerned. Again, I think part of it has to do with Tennessee's defense just lacks ability, lacks depth at all 3 phases of the defense. But Jeremy Pruitt has had a consistent problem of getting his guys to play for him, at least in the last 3 outings. And the word on the street on Pruitt was that he is a player's coach. Well, that has not been the case the last 3 games, and it should never be the case in a season opener. I mean, fall camp is pretty much hell at times, and the season opener is what is fun. Playing the games is what is fun. Practice is supposed to be harder than the games, and here they are not even playing with effort. And the season opener, something that they've been building forward to since the last weekend of November, and to not play with effort is inexcusable. So there's a whole lot to be concerned about. A whole lot to be concerned about. And I'm stunned. Quite frankly, I'm stunned that a red flag has gone up quicker for Jeremy Pruitt than it did with Butch Jones.
That's a good way of putting it. I do think your point about the players, not giving effort, I think it's a good segue into the second main topic here I wanted to discuss on the podcast, and that is Tennessee's culture and how bad is it exactly. And obviously there is a culture problem at Tennessee. There's been a culture problem at Tennessee probably, as you mentioned, it's been probably since 2016, if not maybe even sooner. If not, maybe even go back to maybe the 2014 kind of off season as when things started to really you started having cracks in the foundation of your culture under Butch Jones. And you mentioned a minute that effort was not an issue with Tennessee in 2013 and 2014, or really even in 2015 either. Obviously, Tennessee had those collapses against Oklahoma and against Florida. But, man, that effort they had against Alabama in that game, the effort they had against Georgia in that game, I think the only game you could really maybe question effort in that entire season in 2015 was maybe the Arkansas game. That's the only one I would point to. Everything else, Tennessee absolutely gave effort. The base may not have been good enough or coached well enough to win some of the games, but there was definitely effort there. As you said, it wasn't really until 2016 where effort became an issue, and then that really became prevalent in 2017. And I look at this roster, and Pruitt's done a decent job of kind of overhauling it a bit and getting his guys in here. But most of the guys he has that he's brought in, I mean, they're still sophomores at the oldest for most of them. You obviously do have a guy like Jeremy Johnson who's older, but he's only been here. I mean, they've been here for 2 years. Not really even technically 2 years, but even the older guys, like I said, they've been here or older have been here just for a year at this point, a year and a half. But even the guys like Jeremy Johnson, Emmett Gooden, who's out for the season, so that makes it harder for him to lead. The older guys haven't been here long enough, but most of Pruitt's guys are still freshmen and sophomores, redshirt freshmen. Those aren't guys who typically, they can be leaders. I think Jeremy Banks could be a leader. He has the personality for it. He has the attitude for it. But he's still a sophomore. I don't know how many redshirt juniors, redshirt seniors, or seniors are gonna. They'll listen to a sophomore, but it means something different when it's coming from an upperclassman like a Juwan Jennings, and he had some very strong quotes on Tuesday when he spoke with the media. Ben, you were there to capture it all on camera. So if you want to check out his entire media session, check out our YouTube channel. Just search Rocket Top Insider on YouTube, and I'll have a post with all the videos embedded on RocketTopInsider.com a little bit later too. But I also wrote an article on stuff he said. But if you want to catch all he said, it's a very good listen. But it seems to me, been him, Trey Smith, and Daniel Batuli, but he was out for the game on Saturday. So like I said, it's hard to lead from the sideline. Those three, I don't question their leadership. I don't question their attitude. I think they have the right attitude. I think they are wanting it. I think they want to win. I think they want their teammates to win. I think they want what's best for the team. A lot of the other upperclassmen though, and Ben, I know you have you're not going to give the names of the players, but you have an example of a bad example of some bad behavior of things you don't want to see from players after the game, but. It's these upperclassmen, that a lot of these guys, a lot of these players were still on the team. Were on that 2017 roster. I mean, you look at Jarrett Garantano, you look at obviously Juwan Jennings is exempt from this, I think, but you look at other guys like I'm not trying to call anybody. I'm just using these guys as examples who are on the 2017 roster. I'm not saying these guys are the problem. I'm just saying you look at the roster right now, and there are a lot of guys on that 2017 team who are still on here who are embedded in that just extremely toxic culture and like you're talking about not giving effort. You have guys like Nigel Warrior. You have guys like Marquez Callaway, like I said, like Josh Palmer, like Brandon Johnson, some of the offensive linemen. Obviously, I think Ryan Johnson's not a part of the problem, but he was on the roster too. You just have Marcus Tatum. You have a bunch of these guys who could, once again, Darrell Taylor, Daniel Batuli. I don't think those guys specifically are the problem, but you have, my point in all this was saying, you have a lot of guys on this roster who are still part of that program and part of that culture and part of the not giving effort under Butch Jones. I just wonder, Ben, how long is it going to take to get this culture fixed? Because there are some troubling things that you've like I said, you overheard and saw after the game. Everyone knows about the Jordan Murphy tweets that he was sending out. That's extremely troubling as well. There are just a lot of things that make you do a double take, make you raise your eyebrows, or whatever word you want to use or phrase you want to use to describe how you would react to this. But there are a lot of things that make you just sit there and go, that's not good. That's not how you're supposed to react after this. That's not how a leader is supposed to be. So there's obviously a culture problem in Tennessee still. We all knew it was bad. And all the stories and stuff we heard after Butch Jones was let go and fired, and some of the other former players like Marlon Lane and some of these other guys came out and talked about some of the stuff that happened under Butch. We all knew how bad it was then. We thought, surely after the way the season ended last year, with Garantano and a few other players saying, hey, essentially, if you don't want to be here, get gone. If you don't want to be here and make your team better, make yourself better, we don't need you. They didn't say those exact words, but they might as well have. After that happened, I thought surely, this culture would be able to change it. It would still need some fixing after this year, but I thought surely in 2019 it would be better than what it apparently is. So how Ben, in your opinion, is it a matter of just getting really another 2 years of Pruitt's recruiting cycle to where he has every single player in his roster is his guy, or can it be fixed this year? Is this a problem that can be fixed here in the next 2 to 3 months, or is it really it's going to take another year and a half, 2 years for it to actually finally be fixed and fully addressed?
I mean, in order for it to be the culture that Pruitt wants it to be, I mean, it's going to take another recruiting class or two. But based off the way that Pruitt's team has played the last 3 games, I don't have confidence in Pruitt's culture, to be quite honest. He hasn't given me or shown me anything that his culture is going to be all that much better than Butch Jones's culture, simply because he can't even get the players on the team now to play hard as it is. And that may be because they are 100% Butch's players. That may be the case, because if you look at most of the guys who played on Saturday, most of the guys who were making mistakes, they were Butch Jones guys. So maybe there is credence to the fact that the reason the culture is still remains so bad, even in year 2 under Pruitt, is because there are so many Butch Jones guys. But I still find it concerning that Jeremy Pruitt is supposedly a player's coach, and he's had problems getting them to play hard. That is concerning to me. So in order to get Pruitt's culture in here, it's going to take another recruiting class or 2. But and again, I'm not sold on the fact that even if Pruitt gets his players in here, the culture will be so much better, simply because there's been a lot of dysfunction amongst the coaching staff, and there's not as much dysfunction this year, at least from what we can tell so far. But there's a lot of dysfunction in year 1. Now they have this tremendous coaching staff, and they're unorganized. How does that make sense? One of the best coaching staffs in America on paper, and they are unorganized. And there's only one common thread from last year's dysfunction to this year's staff being unorganized, and that's the guy that's in charge. And so you pile on the fact that his players can't even play on the last 3 games. There's not a whole lot of room for optimism, in my opinion, that just because he gets his players in here, the culture is all of a sudden going to change.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's a good way of looking at it too. And it's frustrating for fans, because I mean, this is a thing that's been an issue for. It's been an issue for a while, and there's been teams on and off that have shown effort, but the effort thing and the execution thing, it feels like that's been an issue prevalent in Tennessee football. You know, like I said, off or on, you could say it wasn't as bad of a problem in 2013, 14, and 15, or maybe even in 2009 under Kiffin. But the effort and execution and stuff, for the most part, has been a prevalent problem in Tennessee's football program for a decade. And like I said, there are definitely years where that's been less true than others, but this has been a problem for a very long time. It feels like, ever since the kind of the ending of the Fulmer era, has it been a problem. And it's just, I mean, how does this get fixed, Ben? I think that's the kind of the biggest question I think this whole podcast episode's been trying to answer, is how does this get fixed, and how long does it take to get fixed? Because Tennessee, they don't have another cupcake. They're not playing UTC this weekend. That's next weekend. They're playing a team that, while they got beat by double digits by Utah, BYU's still a good team. And you like you've said multiple times on this podcast, multiple times on live shows we've done, on Swain's show, you are a believer in BYU, and that they are better than what a lot of Vol fans were kind of thinking they were heading into the season. Now with Tennessee having this really bad loss, I mean, Juwan Jennings seems very hell-bent on that game being the catalyst, and that game, changing Tennessee's identity for the season and making them wake up and, ready to go on Saturday. He said his exact quote was, "It's going to be a hell of a game on this weekend, and he wants ball fans to show up and, give this team one more chance to entertain them and to give them something to cheer for." And I think that's very commendable by Juwan, and I certainly expect him to have that attitude. I just wonder how many of his teammates can he get to buy into that. But Ben, I mean, this is not another cupcake game where you can come out and bounce back against UTC and take out some of your frustrations on a team that it's definitely inferior. If Georgia State wasn't inferior, UTC should be inferior. They're an FCS school. This is BYU that is more than capable of beating you. That has a quarterback who can run, can throw. That there's good play in the trenches from both sides of the ball for BYU. Ben, what do you think the attitude of this team is going to be like? Do you think they're actually going to come out with fire in their belly and ready to go, because it's going to be a night game and it's going to be in front of what I think will be a pretty good crowd probably still, or maybe a decent crowd, or a crowd that won't be maybe lackluster. Maybe they will. I don't know. There will be alcohol in Neyland Stadium, so maybe it'll be a little more rowdy than this past weekend. But I'm curious what your We'll obviously have more of a breakdown of BYU and the game and stuff later this week. But I'm curious now, as we're doing this on Tuesday, Ben, what is your kind of early expectation for that BYU game, and how do you think Tennessee comes out for it? Because I have my doubts. I genuinely do. I definitely expect guys like Juwan, guys like Trey Smith, and other handful of guys are going to come out. And they're going to be fired up. They're going to be ready to go. They're going to have all the want to in the world. I still wonder about a handful of other guys who haven't shown that, and is that this loss going to wake them up or not? Or are they still going to sleep through the alarm and keep hitting that snooze button? I have my doubts. I would like to see that for our sake, for Tennessee's sake, for Vol fans' sake. I would like to see that. I definitely have my doubts right now.
Yeah, I mean, I have my doubts. How can you not have your doubts when the fan has been beaten down so much over the last, obviously this week, to end last season? You had the 2017 debacle, and even forget the last two games of last year to end 2018, but the South Carolina game was miserable last year because Tennessee blew a lead. They win that game, they go to a bowl game, even despite losing to Missouri and Vanderbilt. I think a lot of people forget that, and Jeremy Pruitt's a defensive guy, but his defense came up short that game. The Florida game was a debacle last year, and then you go back to 2017, 4-8, the worst year in program history, although it looks like this year may top that somehow. You go back to 2016, Tennessee has a team that could have made the playoffs, at minimum could have at least made the SEC championship game, should have won the SEC East, had the best team in the division that year, in my opinion, and they lose to South Carolina because of the culture. Jalen Hurd quits on the team. And then on top of that, not only did they blow the SEC East, they had a chance to beat Vanderbilt, go 9-3, and potentially play in the Sugar Bowl. But what happens? They get blown out by Vanderbilt on the road in Vanderbilt's home stadium, although there's nothing but Tennessee orange packed in the stadium. Then you go back to 15, and how many games did Tennessee blow late that year? 4 or 5? I mean, off the top of my head, they were up on Bama in the fourth quarter with 3 minutes to go in Bryant-Denny Stadium. Tennessee should have won that game. The Florida debacle was that 4th and 18 year, I believe, in the swamp. And then, so Alabama game, they did beat Georgia that year.
You had Oklahoma, you had Florida. This is 2015
Yep,
you're talking
Oklahoma.
about? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Oklahoma game, the Florida game, the Alabama game. Just so many games that year that Tennessee should have won. And then you go back to 2014. You had the Arkansas game. That was
2015. I was going to bring that up. That was 2015. In that game you had, you went up at least a touchdown early because I think Evan Berry had a touchdown return or kickoff return for a touchdown in that game. You were up at least 7-0, if not maybe 14-7 at some point in that game. And then, Arkansas just.
I think it's 14-0 because Evan Berry's kickoff return was to start the game. That was the very first play of the game. And then Tennessee just could not stop Arkansas's running game. Alex Collins just lit Tennessee up, and then on top of that, Tennessee could not stop Brandon Allen, Arkansas's quarterback. So that was 15. And then in 14, you had the whole Oklahoma on the road debacle. Then you didn't know who to start between Worley, Peterman, and Dobbs. And then 13 was Butch's first year where they didn't make a bowl game. 2012 to 2010, 2012 was the whole Derrick Dooley era. 2009 was the Lane Kiffin debacle. Obviously, 08 didn't go good because Fulmer got fired, and they lost to Wyoming that year. So I mentioned all that to say, how could you not doubt the stadium and the environment of the stadium this weekend with everything Tennessee fans have been through over the last 10 years? How can you not? And like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, like our caller on the Swain event mentioned this morning, all of the diehards are beginning to stop caring.
Yeah,
that's when you have a problem. So I do think that there will be more fans in the stadium than last week, but it will be far from 102,455. I don't think it'll be a sellout. If it is, it's because BYU fans bought a lot of tickets. But it won't be. If Tennessee was good, then we would have a Tennessee-Oklahoma type environment on Saturday. But because of what Tennessee fans have been through, and we only went through everything on the field. That's not even – I mean, the coaching search and everything off the field has piled on as well. So just because of everything Tennessee fans have been through and the fact that the diehards are beginning to quit caring, that's a huge problem, a huge red flag. And, I think there'll be 90 to 95,000, but 90 to 95,000 at Neyland Stadium for a big football game is not good.
Yeah. That's I think it's a good way to kind of wrap up this podcast here. We could go a little bit longer, but I want to go because Ben and I have stuff to work on. I guess by the time you're listening, this won't be breaking news, but some breaking news as we're recording this. It's not huge news, so don't get too upset or too excited before I say it here. But Tennessee defensive back, redshirt sophomore defensive back, Terrell Bailey, according to a report from 247 Sports, has put his name into the NCAA transfer portal. Not a huge surprise. He was listed as, I think, actually he wasn't listed as a backup. He wasn't on the depth chart on week 1, and he wasn't on the depth chart again for week 2. And you had a true freshman who, Brent, you mentioned it last week. You talked about true freshman Rob Means, who isn't even expected to stay at cornerback his whole time at Tennessee, ahead of him. So not a surprise. Terrell Bailey, who was a Butch Jones recruit, came here in 2017. He has put his name into the transfer portal. Didn't play Saturday. Only appeared in 4 games for Tennessee last year. Didn't play any in 2017. He was a former 3-star guy who is from John Ehret High School down in New Orleans. So just a little bit of news as we head off to the podcast here, but not a big surprise. He and Malik Gray are 2 guys that put their name in the transfer portal over the last few weeks. You also had Kurt Garland do that, but then he came back, and Ben, as we said on the reaction show on Saturday, he played quite a bit. I think the VolQuest guys counted up the snaps of who all played, how many snaps and stuff, and I think Garland played 20, which was more than John Mincy and more than obviously Elijah Simmons, who didn't even play in the game. So that tells you kind of all you need to know about where Tennessee's coaches feel about their defensive line right now. But that's a whole different conversation. Right now, we're all asking the question, how does this get fixed? How long does it take to get fixed? And Ben and I don't really have an answer for you because we don't know. No one knows. It's going to just kind of have to see it and have it all play out. Saturday will be Saturday is going to be huge for Tennessee. It's talk about a must-win game. I mean, this game now, it was already kind of in my opinion, I called it the whole offseason, a must-not-lose. It is definitely now a must-win. If you lose this game, fans are gonna the ones that are still kind of hanging on by a thread are going to be out, and maybe that's not fair because BYU's a good team, and Tennessee could have lost them even they did beat Georgia State, but you lost to Georgia State. You don't have any excuses left. I mean, a lot of the games now that were viewed as toss-ups on the schedule are now being chalked as losses. The games that you figured Tennessee was going to lose are now being turned into blowouts that were, if they weren't already being viewed as blowouts, they're going to be viewed as bigger blowout potentially. The FPI, the Football Power Index for ESPN, now has Tennessee going 4-8 on the season. So that should tell you all I need to know. But Ben and I will be back again later this week for another RTI podcast, and we're going to have tons of content for you this week, getting you ready for the BYU game and talking about how important this game is going to be. Ben will have an offensive and defensive preview for the Cougars, and we'll put that all together and have just a big, here's a big preview of what to expect from the Cougars when they're on the field, on either side of the ball. We'll continue to have practice coverage. Tennessee practice today. Ben will have those notes out here in a little bit. Pruitt will talk to the media on Wednesday. We'll have stuff from that as well. We'll have all kinds of stuff talking about, maybe still stuff happening from Saturday. I think we'll kind of turn the page from Saturday's game here in a little bit, but with that kind of loss, it's hard to turn the page completely on that one. But we'll have all kinds of content for you on RockyTopInsider.com or Rocky Top Insider on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and like I said, YouTube as well. Be sure and check out our YouTube and subscribe to us there. We have all kinds of stuff coming out for you just about every single day on that YouTube channel, so make sure you're subscribed and ready to watch all the stuff when it comes out. But signing off for Ben McKee, I am Nathaniel Rutherford, and this has been another episode of the RTI Podcast.